A Bible and a Camaro modified by the American Army that went from 0 to 200 in 13 seconds. A car with night vision, air and even equipment to disarm mines. This is how Helge Meyer bravely faced a war zone to deliver supplies, food, water and medicine to isolated families during the Bosnian War. This is one of the best stories you will hear in your life about cars and engines, and also about courage and faith. With much joy in my heart, today I will tell you the story of the Ghost Camaro, the phantom Camaro that entered and exited the war zone without being seen. Man, today I'm going to tell you one of the best stories in the world about cars. Among everything I've already shared here on the channel, and what I will still share, I guarantee that this is one of the most exciting stories, because it involves faith, courage, and a car prepared for any mission. I guarantee there are no two stories like this. At least, I've never known another, even similar. Those who know me know I don't like to drag things out. I'll get straight to the video, but before that, I want to ask you to like, share, and leave a comment to engage with me. I am in a challenge to grow this channel, and if you like cars, engines, and stories, you're on the right channel. So share it with a friend who also likes it, and without further ado, let's get to this amazing story. To start all this, I first need to tell you a little bit more about who our hero is here. Who Helge Meyer is, where he comes from, and what his background is after all. It wouldn't be just anyone who could carry out such a mission, right? Helge Meyer was part of the elite corps of the Danish army. Tough as nails, he trained incessantly. He graduated as a combat swimmer and paratrooper, a member of the 10th Special Long-Range Patrol Force, known as the Jaeger Corps, something similar to the American Delta Force. But above all that, he was a man of great faith. In his own words, he was not a religious fanatic, but rather a person who kept his feet on the ground and, aware of life's difficulties, always placed God at the forefront of his missions. One of the trainings conducted by Meyer was extremely exhausting. Called the Psychological March, it consisted of a 100-kilometer march along the west coast of Denmark, with temperatures of 2 degrees Celsius, facing sand dunes 10 to 20 meters high, rain and cold, and the worst part, 2 days without food, only water. You could even choose whether you preferred to take 20 cigarettes or 100 grams of chocolate. To make it even more challenging, it was strictly forbidden to speak throughout the training. To make matters worse, in the last 5 to 15 kilometers, they were forced to walk through the cold waters of the North Sea, wearing a gas mask that made breathing difficult. The training pushed the soldiers to the limits of hunger and exhaustion. Because of all this, you have surely realized that he was an extremely strict officer, even with himself, not limiting himself to giving orders, but training alongside the soldiers. And all this strength and determination would be crucial for a mission that would go down in history, and that only a man with such courage would be capable of accomplishing. Well, now you know, Helge Meyer, the man who would be called God's Rambo, and who would use his Camaro to enter a war zone and deliver supplies. But then you might ask, wouldn't it have been easier to do this with a truck? Why did he have to take those supplies there with a Camaro? And why did they modify his Camaro for this? Well, for you to understand why humanitarian aid trucks weren't reaching these villages and these people, I need to explain to you what was happening in a region called Yugoslavia. And man, I definitely promise I will absolutely simplify it significantly more. And I won't get tangled up in this explanation, but it's really cool for us to know the history and the context of what was happening there. You've probably heard of Yugoslavia. In fact, if you follow soccer, you know that they used to play very well. Stars like Petkovic, who was an idol at Flamengo, were born in what was then Yugoslavia, or Branko Oblak, known for his powerful. The player prepared himself, took a deep breath, and with a swift and powerful motion, delivered a precise and forceful kick to the ball, sending it soaring through the air towards the goal. To summarize the story and make it easier, Yugoslavia was the union of 6 republics: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia, which from 1945, therefore after the Second World War, came to be led by Josip Broz Tito. It was a socialist republic, but not as closed as the Soviet Union. Yugoslavia had trade relations with the West, and the population had a certain freedom to enter and leave the country and such. Not that it was completely free. Tito was a dictator, but it was a much less repressive regime than the Soviet one. The big issue among these countries is that they brought together various cultures, ethnicities and religions within a single country called Yugoslavia, groups that did not have very peaceful coexistence: Muslims, Catholics, Orthodox and Roman Catholics. However, since Tito had great respect and even a certain charisma, these peoples accepted living with their differences without major problems. But in 1980, Josip Broz Tito dies, and there was no longer any popular leader strong enough to maintain the unity of these people. These groups, which already did not get along very well before, but tolerated each other because of Tito, began to fight among themselves. To add to the situation, an economic crisis occurred, and in 1991 the Soviet Union also fell. And all of this led these nationalist groups to think, well, if the Soviet Union is dissolving and we are in crisis, why should we stay united? Let's take the opportunity to dissolve Yugoslavia too. But of course this would not be an easy thing, because not everyone wanted this dissolution. In 1991, Croatia and Slovenia declared independence from Yugoslavia. Of course, Yugoslavia retaliated and there was a war, but both Croatia and Slovenia managed to gain their independence. Later, Macedonia also declared independence in 91. But since Macedonia was the poorest of the republics, Yugoslavia didn't care much about it becoming independent. In other words, of the 6 countries that once made up Yugoslavia, only 3 remained: Serbia, Montenegro, and Bosnia. Until in 1992, Bosnia decided that it also wanted to become independent. And this is where our hero will act with his Camaro. The problem is that Bosnia was home to 3 ethnic groups within it. 44% of the population were Muslims called Bosniaks, who advocated that Bosnia should be completely independent from Yugoslavia. 31% of Bosnia's population were Serbs, and argued that the territories where the population was predominantly Serbian should not be independent and should remain part of Yugoslavia. And 17% of the population were Croats, who argued that Bosnia should be annexed to Croatia. In other words, within the same country, 3 different peoples were fighting among themselves and also fighting against the Serbian army, defending Yugoslavia. And it is in this context that the population begins to become increasingly isolated without water, electricity, access to medicine, food, and everything else. It is during this time that the famous siege of Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, took place, lasting 4 years. This photo you see of people running is because Serbian snipers would stay in the mountains surrounding the city, shooting at civilians. Some streets even had warnings written on the walls saying that the street was targeted by snipers, so that people wouldn't stay in the street for too long, as they would become. Targets are essential benchmarks in various fields. They guide actions and decisions, ensuring alignment with goals. In business, targets like sales goals are crucial for strategic planning. And it's because of this kind of everyone against everyone fight that the humanitarian aid trucks couldn't reach all the places, because they were looted. After all, trucks are vehicles, and on the way they were looted. So often the truck that was going to a Bosniak village was looted by Croats on the way, or it was going to deliver supplies to a Serbian village. Then the Bosniaks would loot it on the way. So my friends, the only way to deliver supplies to everyone was if you had a car really fast enough to sneak into this war zone, deliver the supplies, and leave without being noticed, because if noticed, it would certainly be shot down. Knowing the terrible conditions these people were facing, Helge seeks out the American air base at the Rhine-Main, located in Germany, which is also a NATO base, and explains, "Look, I have a Camaro, and I think I can transform it and enter this war zone to deliver these supplies." Initially, no one takes him very seriously because it's kind of a crazy idea, right? wanting to enter a place with a civilian car where not even military armored vehicles were managing to reach. But since he had a background as a former combatant, he was a guy who knew very well what he would face on the battlefield. He knew it wasn't an easy situation. A general buys into his idea, and that's when they start transforming this car. This general went further and convinced the Corps of Engineers and several soldiers there to believe in the idea and find ways to help Helge. These engineers then asked him to bring the Camaro, and they immediately started planning all the equipment they wanted to install so that the car would have maximum safety and the necessary preparation to face war conditions. The first change was to the engine. Officially, this 79 Camaro has a 5.7 V8 engine with 182 horsepower. After modifications, it went up to 220 horsepower. But in addition, nitrous was installed in this car precisely so that if he found himself in a situation where he needed to leave very quickly from somewhere, he could use this tool. With the nitrous, the Camaro would reach 440 horsepower, going from 0 to 200 in 13 seconds. The interesting thing is that all of this was happening in the 90s, but the Camaro was from 1979. This engine had about 12 years of use, and the engineers feared that when activating the nitrous for too long, the engine might not withstand it, and for this reason, they adapted a relay that would cut off the nitrous immediately after 13 seconds to avoid damaging the engine. The tires were run flat of normal sizes, and inside the car, it carried 2 spare tires. The vehicle was reinforced with steel plates, and visibility was only possible through the windshield. The car was entirely painted with paint that absorbs infrared, making it undetectable to various equipment. All the internal lights of the car were removed, even those on the dashboard and radios, so that no light would reflect on his face at night, revealing his position. 2 large infrared headlights were installed at the front of the vehicle and were connected to goggles inside the car, which, when worn, allowed Helge to have night vision. Kevlar panels reinforced the armor, including on the floor. The Camaro also featured a kind of battering ram to clear debris and blades from the front that could remove landmines if necessary. With all this, there was still space left to carry 400 kilo of supplies, including food, water, and medicine for the population. The American Army also equipped Helge with various gear such as boots, backpacks, and a special uniform that also absorbs infrared, an infrared laser light that, according to Helge, was capable of burning a sniper's retina from a certain distance without the sniper realizing they were going blind, since infrared is invisible to us. A map of the war zone, compasses, and several bulletproof vests were also given to him, along with a helmet that would save his life, as I will tell you later. One of the most used devices by him was a 15 centimeters heat detector that was capable of registering body heat up to 1 kilometer away. He also received radios to use specific frequencies to communicate both with the Air Force and ground forces. And you might be wondering, okay, but did he go to war without taking any weapons? No. According to his own words, my Bible was mine. Weapon, no revolvers, no grenades, none of that, only the Bible with a lot of faith and familiar with. With the roads of Bosnia and the interior of Croatia, Helge made deliveries and donations both day and night. Several times he found himself in dangerous situations. In one of them he was hit, but the bullet stopped in his helmet. When he was not on duty, he hid among the rubble or in the middle of the forest, since his car used special paint and was not easily identified. Helge says that he helped both Christians and Muslims, and that when people heard the roar of his Camaro, they would come out to meet him, while others, afraid, thinking he might be a CIA agent or an enemy, would hide. One of the most beautiful and moving moments happens when he was in the Veres region, and it demonstrates the magnitude of the tragedy that was unfolding. Humanitarian aid, read in the first person what he wrote in his diary. In 1994, I was driving through Vares at night, completely exhausted and looking for a safe place to sleep. Amidst the ruins, I examined the area around with my detector that responds to body heat. In the ruins in front, it showed me that there was body heat. There must have been 2 or 3 people I saw. Candlelight through the boarded up door. I knocked and the candle went out immediately. After Another knock, I said, "I am Mr. Meyer from the United States Army." A gentleman opened the door and invited me in. There was also a young woman with her newborn baby present. Everyone were dirty and visibly malnourished. I got soap, water, food, and vitamins for the baby from my Camaro. The young mother washed herself and her child and fed the newborn. We sat together in silence around the candle for a while. The old man read his Quran attentively while I read the Bible, which is my constant companion. Then I returned to the car and was about to get into my sleeping bag when someone knocked on my window. It was the young woman who handed me her child to hold. I will never forget this touching moment in my life. This symbol encourages me every day to help the children of war. I thank God and this mother for the trust. Another passage clearly shows how Helge was being protected by God during this mission was when he was near Tuzla. He recounts that he was driving his Camaro to a certain village, and at a certain point along the way, the Camaro simply shut off completely. He tried several times to start it, but the car wouldn't start at all, so he thought, well, I'll have to sleep here. He pushed the car to a hidden spot and slept. The next day, he arrived at the village and recounted what had happened, and discovered that on that night, precisely on the road he was traveling, all the cars that passed had been robbed, and the owners lost their lives, so he was spared, as if God did not allow his car to pass that point. In his accounts, Helge describes how war changes people in every aspect, how children lost their innocence and behaved almost like adults, constantly afraid, hiding, and sometimes bearing great responsibilities for their ages. It's worth noting that many became orphans during the conflict. Another sad thing reported by him is that between one visit and another, people disappeared. When he visited the first time, he would find a family, and on the second visit, the parents had vanished, leaving only the children. But did Helge Meyer's family support what he was doing? In fact, his family didn't know that. He was doing this type of mission. He instructed the military to say that he was in training, things like that, so his family didn't know for a long time that he was doing this type of mission. By being able to enter and exit the war zone unnoticed, his car became known as the Ghost Camaro, the Phantom Camaro. After dozens of trips delivering supplies and the end of the war, Helge took his Camaro back to his home. Several pieces of equipment were removed from the vehicle. It was painted orange and can still be used in everyday life with over 100,000 kilometers driven. These are the last pieces of information that can be found about this car. What an incredible story, isn't it? Man, when I learned about this story, I was very moved. For you to have an idea, the Bosnian War is considered the worst conflict since World War II. How sad he was. There are several things that happened in that war that I can't even mention here because otherwise YouTube would restrict the video. It was so bad that Slobodan Milosevic, who was the president of Serbia at that time, went to the International Criminal Court. Not only him, but also some generals who participated in this conflict for war crimes. But a little before the end of his trial, he dies of a heart attack. He is found dead inside his cell. He was 64 years old, and although many people said and conspiracies arose and such, he indeed had heart problems, so it is possible that it was a natural death. This story is all told in a book that I will leave for you on the screen, but there are no versions in Portuguese. It was written by Helge Meyer himself. Did you like the video? Thank you very much for being here with me listening to my stories about cars and engines. I am really happy. I ask you from the bottom of my heart to help me commenting, sharing with a friend, liking, and subscribing to the channel. If you want to help us with thanks a lot, it will also be very welcome. And I will leave links to books pinned below in case you want to gift someone who loves cars and engines with a book about cars, about vehicle stories. I will leave a list of books where you can buy and also support the channel. Thank you very much and see you next time.